Welcome back, everyone. It's Eric from Rare Candy, and today we're going to be talking about what I think is one of the absolute best new cards that we're about to get in Brilliant Stars, and that's going to be a new Lumineon card.
You serious?
Yes, Lumineon fans, all 5 of you that exist out there, this Pokemon is finally getting some justice after years of being ignored with a very playable card. Now, of course, I will be still doing my full Brilliant Stars set review in a couple of weeks where, of course, I'll talk about Lumineon there, but I really wanted to take some time and go a little bit more in depth on this card. So first, let's take a look at what makes Lumineon V so special. Lumineon V is going to be a basic Pokemon with 170 HP, lightning weakness, 1 retreat cost, and of course it has this very powerful ability. Whenever you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may search your deck for a supporter card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. Now, if you're a bit newer to the game, this is probably the first time you've seen this ability on a Pokemon like this, but this isn't the first time we've seen this effect. Lumineon V is essentially a spiritual reprint of some other immensely impactful cards from over the years, most notably Tapu Lele GX back from Guardians Rising and Jirachi EX from Plasma Blast. And also a shout out to Lapras back from Legend Maker for all my Pokeboomers out there. I got you. But what has me so excited for Lumineon V is how it might potentially change the playability of many supporters in the format. Tapu Lele GX, for example, took several supporters from being completely unplayable and forgotten to being absolute staples of its respective format. And the reason for that is due to how consistent these abilities make finding these supporter cards on the turns that we need them. So often we see interesting, usually non-draw based supporters get printed, but due to their nature of only being good on very select turns, it usually requires you to run them in counts far higher than you actually want to if you want to have a chance to be able to draw into them. But with Lumineon V, that's all potentially a thing of the past. First up, what decks could even abuse a card like this? Well, I think the styles of deck that certainly won't use Lumineon V are going to be decks that are already running the Inteleon engine. That engine largely serves a similar function, which makes Lumineon V a little bit redundant, and also most of those decks run Path to the Peak as their stadium of choice, so don't expect Lumineon to pop up there. This is going to be a card that largely sees play in more traditional styles of draw engines with decks that previously would consider cards like Crobat V, Eldegoss V, etc. So think decks like Single Strike, maybe the Moltres version of Rapid Strike Urshifu, Zacian variants, etc. So what supporter cards could look to benefit the most here? Well, first give this video a like to feed the YouTube algorithm, make sure you're subscribed, and let's jump in and find out. Alright guys, so up first we have Dancer, which is a card that you kind of want to play on the first turn of the game, hence why we are going to be discussing it right out the gate here. But it says draw 2 cards. If you go second and it's your first turn, draw 3 more cards. So even though cards like Hop don't see a whole lot of play that allow you to draw 3, a straight draw 5 with no downside is actually a good bit better. Again, prior to Lumineon, you would need to play like 4 of these in a deck and or Pokegear to give yourself a shot at finding these. So I could even maybe see Dancer being kind of like a Lily style card back from the Sun and Moon era, where it didn't really see a whole lot of play, but eventually it did start to pop up as a one of in certain decks. Next up, we have another collection of supporters that you're probably looking to play turn 1. These are going to be some of the better Pokemon search supporters that we have access to right now. And since previously Tapu Lele GX torpedoed Bridget from being an unplayable supporter to being a staple of the format, these definitely seem like a group of cards we naturally kind of want to take a look at now that we have Lumineon. But to kick things off, we have Gloria up first. This is going to be a new supporter card we're also getting in Brilliant Stars. It allows you to search your deck for 3 basic Pokemon that don't have a rule box and put them onto your bench, then shuffle your deck. And this is almost identical to the old Bridget. Now, I think Glory does have some other issues surrounding it that Bridget did not, but hey, this is a card that is definitely in my wheelhouse. I love this style of effect. Another card we have that has kind of popped up a little bit in the Malamar deck is Brawly. It lets you search your deck for 3 basic Rapid Strike Pokemon, put them onto your bench. And then we also have Adventurer's Discovery, which allows us to search your deck for 3 Pokemon V, reveal them, put them into our hand, then shuffle our deck. I think Gloria is probably the one that sticks out to me the most. Most of the time in Rapid Strike decks, you're either playing all Pokemon V, which Adventurer's Discovery could help get you, or the only non-Pokemon V you're playing are the Inteleon line, and you're probably not playing Lumineon in that deck to start with. So Brawly might still not see a whole lot of play outside of the Malamar deck, but Gloria, and maybe to a similar degree, Adventurer's Discovery, definitely seem like they might have a shot at popping up at least. Next up, we have a group of cards I think really epitomizes the usefulness of a card like Lumineon V. These are going to be powerful draw and search supporters that you can only play on very specific turns of the game. In this case, being turns after your Pokemon were knocked out. So the first one's going to be a new card, Cynthia's Ambition. We draw cards until we have 5 cards in our hand. And if any of our Pokemon were knocked out during our opponent's last turn, we draw until we have 8 instead. I think a lot of the time, cards like Professor's Research would usually outclass something like this, but we are getting Ultra Ball reprinted in this same set as well, which is going to be a card that will more consistently allow us to play down our hand size to a lower count, which might make Cynthia's Ambition a potential one of in your supporter line that you can search out with Lumineon V. Similarly, we also have Bruno, which is kind of more of a shuffle draw take on this effect. We shuffle our hand into our deck, draw 4, but if our Pokemon were knocked out, we draw 7 instead. I love Bruno. It's a card that really is good for single prize and stage 2 decks. Though I'm not sure if you're playing Lumineon in these sorts of single prize decks, I think that does give me a little bit of hesitation for declaring that cards like Bruno or even Gloria that we just looked at will see widespread play, but Lumineon, if anything, only improves its chances at popping up. And the search supporter that we have on the list here is, of course, Raihan. You guys are probably familiar with this at this point. If our Pokemon were knocked out during our opponent's last turn, we attach a basic energy card from our discard pile to one of our Pokemon. And if we do, search our deck for a card and put it into our hand. So this is a card that has almost exclusively seen play in Inteleon engines, because really this card is only good if you have ways at searching out right when you need it. But hey, again, with Lumineon V in the mix, now decks with other engines have a more realistic chance of being able to play Raihan, which is only a good thing. I'm a huge fan of this effect, so I'm excited to see what other decks might make use of this thing. So taking a look at some slightly less restrictive draw supporters, one I want to talk about is Bird Keeper. So of course we switch our active with one of our bench Pokemon, and if we do, draw 3 cards. So we do still have the Bird Keeper attackers in the format, such as Rowlet and Swanna, just as an example. But even beyond those, this switching effect is definitely one that I think could be good at having a way at searching out. Think of, let's say, Zacian decks, just as an example. The big downside to Brave Blade, unfortunately, is that it prevents you from attacking on the next turn. But if you have an Ultra Ball in hand or a Quick Ball in hand, that suddenly can get you a Lumineon, grabbing you Bird Keeper to allow you to switch out of the active and be able to actually attack with the same Zacian again. So decks in this vein that also might happen to be playing Lumineon might want to consider Bird Keeper in some sort of count. Another draw 3 base supporter we have is going to be Peonia, and this is really one of those cards that I think could gain a lot from Lumineon V. You put up to 3 prize cards into your hand, then for each prize card you put into your hand in this way, you put a card from your hand back face down as a prize card. So again, this is another one of those supporter cards that has actually seen play in Inteleon engines. But now if you are looking to pull off your whole Dream Ball Peonia combo, if you're running Lumineon, you can slot just one Peonia into your deck, be able to find it easily on the turn that you need it, and do whatever prize manipulating shenanigans that you're up to. Now, to be fair, if you are trying to pull off the Dream Ball combo, you do still need some way at finding your Dream Ball on the turn that you want it. But hey, Lumineon still opens up a door for this to see play outside of those Inteleon based decks. Next up, we have the Mustard supporter cards, and Brilliant Stars in general is going to give a huge buff to these things. Between Lumineon V and Ultra Ball, it's going to be easier than ever to potentially pull off these combos. So you can only play these cards when they are the last one in your hand, but in the case of Rapid Strike Mustard, you put a Rapid Strike Pokemon from your discard pile onto your bench. If you do, draw 5 cards, and Single Strike Mustard says search your deck for a Single Strike Pokemon, put it onto your bench, then draw 5 cards. So if you ever wanted to play some sort of like turbo Urshifu VMAX deck where you're using Gale Thrust on like turn 1 of the game, there's no better time to try to pull that off than after Brilliant Stars releases. The big issue with these cards of the past is both getting your hand size low enough to be able to play these, and also finding these at the same time to be able to pull off the combo. But again, thanks to Ultra Ball and Lumineon V, this combo is going to be easier than ever. And at this point, it's really just going to come down to the quality of Rapid Strike and Single Strike Pokemon that we want to accelerate out of our deck and discard. Speaking of accelerating things, we have a couple of supporter-based energy acceleration options, some of which have seen actually a lot of play even without something like Lumineon. But Melanie is going to be probably the main one that comes to people's mind. We, of course, attach a water energy card from our discard to one of our Pokemon V, then draw 3 cards. Again, this is another one of those cards that has mainly seen play in Inteleon decks just because you really want to be able to search Melanie out on specific turns. But with Lumineon V now in the mix, our water attackers are not going to be shackled to the Inteleon engine if they don't want to be. Another supporter that accelerates energy from discard is going to be Rose. It allows us to attach up to 2 basic energy from our discard to one of our Pokemon V Max, then we discard our hand. Luckily for a while now, we've actually had a few cards that can kind of mitigate the hand disruption that Rose inflicts with cards like Kricketunity or Rose Tower. But one of the other issues that's been lingering is finding Rose on the turn that you want to play it. So if you are a Rayquaza V Max fan and you've been looking for a reason to dust off that archetype, Lumineon and also Ultra Ball as well might potentially give this archetype a boost and make it a little bit more consistent going forward. And the other supporter I want to give a shout out to is Elisa Sparkle. I think this one probably less so than some of the others, just because if we do start playing Lumineon, that is going to limit our draw power with Genesect V, but nevertheless, there is definitely some synergy here. Of course, Elisa Sparkle will allow us to search our deck for Fusion Strike energies and attach them to our Fusion Strike Pokemon. Getting all 4 Fusion Strike energy in play is definitely a priority for a lot of these Mew VMAX decks that lean very heavily on Meloetta, because if we can get all 4 energy into play very quickly with Power Tablets, it's not too hard to one-shot opposing Pokemon VMAX. So even though Mew VMAX decks have a ton of draw power, limiting your draw by 1 card to be able to have a Lumineon on the field is something players I think at least have to take into consideration. Up next, we need to talk about the healing supporters that are in the format. With, of course, I think Cheryl being the main one that comes to mind for people. But Cheryl is one of these cards that, again, has mainly seen play in Inteleon decks and now is kind of unshackled from that sort of engine. So of course, Cheryl says heal all damage from each of our evolution Pokemon. Then if we do, discard all energy from the Pokemon that were healed in this way. But we do have some other supporters here that we want to look at. We of course have Cook that came out not too long ago that says heal 70 from your active Pokemon. However, most of the format right now does tend to be evolution Pokemon. So Cheryl, I think right now, might be slightly outclassing a card like that, but it is one we do need to keep our eye on, especially if we start to see decks gain traction that aren't evolution decks or can't afford to discard their energy. But the other card here, as you can see, is going to be a new supporter, Charon's Care, that we're getting in Brilliant Stars. We put one of our colorless Pokemon that has any damage counters on it and all cards attached to it into our hand. So there's been a little bit of talk online about Togekiss VMAX being paired with this card, which I definitely think makes some sense. So between Togekiss's attack and Lumineon V as well, it seems like it's going to be pretty consistent to be able to play this card and deny your opponent those KOs on your damaged Togekiss. Next up, we have our damage modifying supporters, most notably being Leon. Leon, of course, says during this turn, your Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. And actually, Leon's one of the few non-draw based supporters in this discussion video that has seen play, even outside of Inteleon. You know, like so many other cards that we're talking about today, the big issue with Leon is that it's a card you really only want to run probably one of in your deck. But of course, finding it when you need it is going to be the tough part. And we have seen people try to play things like Eldegoss V with it in the past to be able to get it back out of the discard pile. But I think Lumineon is going to make things even easier because with Eldegoss, you had to find it and discard it to be able to use it. Now with Lumineon, you just have to find it and you can use it. So if the 30 damage does change the math for your deck, Leon is definitely a card you could find yourself searching with your Lumineon V. And on that same note, single strike decks might want to consider Karen's Conviction instead. So it serves a very similar role, but of course it is definitely a little bit stronger for single strike Pokemon. Their attacks do 20 more damage to your opponent's active for each prize card your opponent has already taken. So of course, if your opponent has taken 5 prize cards, you're going to be doing an extra 100 damage. And a lot of single strike decks already carve out space for 2 Crobat. I could easily see one of those being changed to a Lumineon V and now having an easy way at finding those Karens on the turns that you might want them. Next up, we have Flannery, which says discard a special energy from one of your opponent's Pokemon and discard a stadium in play as well. So as I just mentioned, single strike decks, I think easily could sort of carve out space for a Lumineon, thus making Flannery a card that's much easier to search out. But even though it is a single strike card, I think Flannery still could be useful in other non-single strike decks. So much of the format right now is special energy, and being able to turn your Quick Ball or your Ultra Ball into a way at discarding energy is, I think, a really useful effect. I think the Stadium discard probably a little less useful right now just because the main Stadium decks want to discard is Path to the Peak, and Lumineon's ability isn't really going to help with that. Nevertheless, the Stadium discard is a bonus, but I think the discarding energy is a really cool function that your Lumineon V could provide for you. Next up, we have Phoebe, another card that's kind of proven itself in some of these decks that play the Inteleon engine, but during this turn, damage from your Pokemon's VMAX attacks isn't affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. So of course, guys, if you do run into something like a Zamazenta V or a Decidueye, just as a couple of examples, Phoebe does provide you an out against those sorts of attackers, and now you no longer need the Inteleon engine to be able to find this on those turns you want to counter those pesky wall Pokemon. And for the final card we're going to talk about today is, of course, Boss's Orders. Even though Lumineon V gives a boost to any of the popular supporters that have been seeing play, it especially gives a buff to Boss's Orders. I can't count how many times I have played an Ultra Ball to grab Tapu Lele GX to search Guzma or a Lysander out of my deck for the game-winning play. We've already seen this to an extent with Eldegoss V ever since it got printed, and I definitely expect that dynamic to re-emerge after Lumineon V drops as well. And that's going to wrap up my picks right now for some of the best uses for the new Lumineon V coming out. Now, I will say, just as a disclaimer, I don't actually expect Lumineon V to be quite as impactful as Tapu Lele GX was when it came out. Tapu Lele GX completely transformed the format. But right now, we do have other powerful draw engines that this card will have to contend with, such as Inteleon and also the Genesect Fusion Strike engine. And unlike when Tapu Lele GX came out, we can no longer play supporters on turn 1, making supporter-based search a little weaker than it was back during the Sun and Moon era. But with that being said, guys, what do you think about Lumineon V? Do you think this is going to be a very impactful card for the Pokemon TCG? And what decks and what supporters are you looking forward to playing with this thing? Let me know your full thoughts down below in the comment section. But if you guys did enjoy this discussion video, be sure to drop a like, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. That way you'll stay up to date with the rest of my Brilliant Stars coverage. And if you want to take your support to the next level, you can also become a patron at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or pick up some merch at rarecandytcg.com. Links will be down below in the description. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.